Okay, I've been asked to do a small how-to video on how to build these little Jawjacker stands that I use. So I'm going to do that for you. I'm going to start by going off a list of materials here. So take notes. First thing you're going to need is a board. About 2 inches by 16 3/4, and I'm using 1/2 inch thick wood. I just get my board from appliance packaging because they're good quality wood. You also need 2 carriage bolts, 1/4 inch diameter or smaller. They need to be about 2 1/4 inches long and have some nuts and washers for them. I like to use nylon lock nuts because they're not going to come off. Also going to need a couple screws that are 1 inch long, 2 PTO pins that are 5/16 in diameter. You're going to need some Schedule 40 PVC. Don't get the thin-walled stuff. That junk does not work. You can get 10-foot lengths and cut it up if you wish. I just like to buy the 2-foot pre-cut pieces at Home Depot because they're easier to fit in your vehicle, they're easier to work with, and you know what you need, 7 of those. So you also need 4 1/2 inch end caps, 4 screws that are 1.5 inches long, and 4 45-degree 1/2 inch elbows, PVC, and 2 90-degree side outlet socket elbows, PVC, the 1/2 inch, and some PVC cement. Now, if you don't know what all this means, don't panic. I'm going to show you what I put together, and you can kind of get an idea. Okay, here we have the board that I used. The 2 inch wide by 16 3/4 by 1/2 inch board that I cut and used. Okay, you're going to need to take and cut a joining piece that joins the 2 sockets together that is 14 inches long. So cut that first, and then you'll need to put these elbows on the ends, the 3-piece elbows on the ends, and make sure they're lined up with each other, perfectly straight with each other. Glue them on with the PVC cement. Set that aside. Now we have upper legs, lower legs, and the joining piece to cut. So the upper legs, you need to cut 4 of those at 10.5 inches. The lower legs, you need to cut 4 of those at 17 1/4 inches, and set them aside. You take your 45-degree elbows and the upper legs and PVC cement them on and set them aside. Take your lower legs and you'll take the end caps and pre-drill them with a 1/8 inch or smaller drill bit, probably a little bit smaller, and depending what screw you use, and then take your 1.5 inch screws and drive them through so that you have something on the feet to grab into the ice, and then PVC those caps on. Now you can do different lengths on these, make your stand a little higher or a little closer to the ground depending on how tall you are. I just made this one to fit me and to make sure that it fit in my case that I plan on carrying it in, so just keep that in mind. Also, I'm using 1/2 inch PVC, the Schedule 40, because it's plenty strong. I found I tried making one out of 3/4 and it was stronger, but it's a bit of a pain to work with, and it's a lot heavier and it takes up a lot more space, and I didn't feel like I needed 3/4, so I resigned myself to 1/2 inch. Okay, once you've got all these pieces glued together and dried, just make sure that when you're gluing them that the glue doesn't come out into the part where you're going to put more PVC, because then you can't get it in and out. So make sure it doesn't drip anywhere you don't want it to. Okay, the next step is to take these, once they've been glued together, and drill through them dead center if you can, with a 1/4 inch drill bit, both ends. And then you're going to center them on the board like so, maybe with the clamp. I use a little drywall clamp on the middle to keep it in place. Make sure that it's flush with the ends, make sure that it's centered, and then drill through the holes you've drilled into the board with an 1/8 inch bit, and then with a 1/4 to make the holes big enough for the carriage bolts to go through. Then you'll take the carriage bolts with a nice smooth flat top. I like to put a pair of vice grips on them to keep them from spinning until I get them tightened down. And then you'll put the washer and nut on this side and tighten it down until this just starts to bend a little bit. Don't want to crack it, but you do want it firmly on there. I do use the nylon lock nuts because they'll never come off with vibration. Once you've gotten this together, we'll set it aside for now. Then we're going to need to assemble one without everything put together, and I'll explain. You have to take your upper leg and you have to sand the end of it so that it goes in and out easily and doesn't get stuck. Okay? And when you do that, that's the only part you're going to sand. You're not going to sand any other parts other than these. So just keep that in mind. But you have to sand it a little bit at a time and check it and check it and check it, because while you want it to go in easily and come out easily, you don't want to fall out once you're sticking it in and trying to put it together. It's nice to have just a little bit of tension. So just check it as you go. Okay, once we get that far, we get them all sanded, we get them all put in position. These lower legs do not need to be sanded. In fact, you don't want them sanded. You want them to have a little bit of tension when you put them in so they stay in place. And you can twist them and get them out pretty easily, and they stay in place really well. So you don't sand those. Okay, next we're going to assemble one. So we get it together like so, and it'll just be loose. I mean, it'll stand up, but it'll be able to move the legs, etc. And you're going to want to take and twist them so that these elbows, these 45-degree elbows, are this way and not this way. Make sure you're aiming them forward. And you just want to say, well, what feels good to me? I'm looking at it here thinking I went with about 5-6 inches maybe from the elbow back to the board. So not much of a slope, but enough to be stable. And once you've got it in position the way you think it should be when it's done, when you're going to want it, then you're going to have to take a 1/4-inch drill bit, and you're going to have to drill through here where I place these pins. You're going to have to drill through the 1/4-inch, and you're going to have to ream it a little bit because you want that pin to slide in and out easily. You don't want problems while you're out there on the ice and everything's cold and difficult to work with. But you get that 1/4-inch drilled, and then put your pins in place. I'll explain what these pins are in a minute. Pins and clips. And then you're going to want to mark your stand, because this would be, for example, this is stand D. I have A, B, C, and D because I have 4 of them in here. And you're going to mark them front and rear. So just pick a front and a rear for now, and then start and label them 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the upper legs that go in, this is D's stand. It belongs to D, and this is leg 1. So you mark it D1. Now why do I do this? Because, as anyone who does this kind of thing knows, where I've drilled this through, this leg is only going to fit exactly in this socket. It might be a little off on the others, and you won't get the pin through. So that's a pain to deal with. So just make sure you mark it. Now, also, on the top here on the rear, I put 2 screws in next to the carriage bolt, and the reason being is so that the Jawjacker back will sit between those and not move anywhere. The front's got a pin all the way through it. It's not going to move, but the rear can really get to swinging if you don't give it a little bit of stability. The next thing we do is we put it on the board, line it up with the front of the board on the Jawjacker, and then we make a couple marks where our holes are on the Jawjacker. Now keep in mind, I've reamed this hole on the Jawjacker and this one back here with a 5/16 bit so that the pins will fit smoothly. Once we've marked these spots underneath the pipe here, I've taken a drill with a 5/16 or 1/4-inch bit and just held it on there and let it burn its way down a little bit at a time. And I put the Jawjacker stand, or Jawjacker back on the stand and checked it with the pin to make sure we're not going too far, but we can still get the pins on easily. And I'll show you those pins and what that's about in just a moment. Okay, here we have it fully assembled. You can see how the pins, the arm on the pin goes in these grooves I've cut. That lets it sit tightly and hold the Jawjacker pretty firmly onto the stand. Now, something I should mention, if you don't get your legs just perfect and they don't sit perfectly on your cement at home or what have you, it's really not a big deal. The ice is never flat with the snow and what's on it, and it always sits just fine with the screws that stick out the bottom. They hang really well. So don't get too worried if you don't get it perfect. To show you what I'm using, if we go to Harbor Freight and we get the universal clevis pin assortment for dirt cheap, like $9 or whatever, this is what we're using. For the PTO pins, same thing. Go to Harbor Freight, get them cheap. And last but not least, I'm going to show the system that I use now. I used to have a little alarm I put on them. I've upgraded to Bluetooth now. There's an app called Tipz. It lets you keep track of your devices. It lets you change the ringtone. It lets you change the angle that they do. It lets you do all sorts of cool things with them. And here's the Tipz. This one's called the Tipz Deep Freeze Max. It's the latest one they have. I really like it better than their old ones because not only does it send a signal to your phone, but it has the LED. You can change the color to red, green, whatever you want. You can just program it to be whatever color you like. And this type you can actually program to be a tip down instead of a tip up. If I had tip up on here and this goes down, this is the top on the bottom. The top would have to be up here, and that means that the location of the button to turn it on would be here, which is on the bottom, which is kind of a pain. But I keep the button right here on the top that you push to turn it on, and when it goes tip down, it still activates. So I like these a lot better than their old ones. But I really recommend getting some of these. Now I should mention, and I have in a previous video, how I've attached these. Go to Harbor Freight, get some of those cheap hacksaw blades that already have holes in the ends of them. Cut a piece off, drill out your mechanism and put a little bolt and nut here that hold that blade in place, and it's just perfect to put rubber bands around it. I've glued them on. I've tried all sorts of tape and stuff. I found that rubber bands are the best thing to put these together with because eventually you're going to have to change the batteries in them, and the rubber bands don't fall off. Take a few extras with you in case one breaks, but that's how I found the best way to attach it in the cold. This is kind of everything I can think to tell you about how to make this. If you have any questions, just comment below and I will be happy to answer them. But have fun and tight lines.